King Tiger. Hitler's unfulfilled hope burned under the tracks of the IS-2. On August 13, 1944, Soviet scouts cautiously approached a German tank frozen in the middle of a Polish village. 69 tons of armor stood in absolute silence. No shots, no engine roar, not a single sound. When the Red Army soldiers climbed inside, they could not believe their eyes. A full ammunition load, fueled tanks, functioning mechanisms. The crew of this steel monster simply ran away, abandoning the Third Reich's latest secret machine. A few hours earlier, this tank was considered the invulnerable king of the battlefield. A machine that Hitler called his last hope, a tank for whose creation Germany spent colossal resources in the middle of the war. And here it stands, abandoned like a useless toy. What went wrong with this iron giant? And why did German tank crews prefer to flee rather than fight in the most powerful tank of the Second World War? The history of the King Tiger began in August 1942, when Germany was still confidently advancing on Stalingrad and rushing toward Caucasian oil. It would seem, why did a victorious country possessing the excellent Tiger heavy tank and preparing the Panther for production need another heavy tank? The answer lay in a single weapon. The 6th Department of the Wehrmacht Weapons Office received an order to create a carrier for the newest 88mm gun with a barrel length of 71 calibers. This weapon pierced any armor at distances inaccessible to the enemy. The German command wanted to obtain a sniper tank capable of destroying enemy vehicles long before they could respond. The case was exceptional for world tank building. Usually, designers first project the vehicle and then select suitable armament for it. Here, everything was turned upside down. The gun came first, and the tank was supposed to become merely a carriage for this monstrous weapon. It was this decision that subsequently gave birth to most of the King Tiger's problems. Two irreconcilable competitors entered the struggle for the right to create the new tank. On one side stood the design bureau of the legendary Dr. Ferdinand Porsche, creator of famous cars and a personal friend of Adolf Hitler. On the other side was the firm Henschel & Son, whose chief engineer Erwin Aders bore the unofficial nickname Father of Tigers for his merits in creating the first Tiger. Ferdinand Porsche approached the matter with the scope of a genius who disregarded the financial restrictions of wartime. He proposed 5 variants of the tank at once with various power plants, gasoline and diesel engines, electric and hydraulic transmissions, and front and rear turret placement options. His projects amazed with engineering boldness, but simultaneously frightened the military with their complexity and high cost. Porsche's electromechanical transmission required scarce copper in enormous quantities. The longitudinal torsion bar suspension was original, but of questionable reliability. Porsche believed so much in his victory that he made a fatal mistake. Even before the announcement of the competition results, he ordered the production of 50 turrets for his project. The doctor showed the same overconfidence when working on the first Tiger, and back then he got away with it thanks to his personal friendship with the Führer. Erwin Aders from the Henschel firm chose the opposite strategy. No revolutionary solutions, no risky experiments. Maximum unification with the already produced Panther, proven components, and assemblies. Strict adherence to the customer's requirements. Aders rejected the angular forms of the first Tiger and took the sloped arrangement of armor plates as a basis, like on the Panther. As a power plant, he chose a 700-horsepower Maybach gasoline engine, already mastered by industry. The chassis received 9 dual road wheels with internal cushioning, arranged in a staggered pattern. It was this staggered pattern of wheels that played an unexpected role in the project's fate. The fact was that a similar suspension scheme was developed personally by the director of the 6th Department, Dr. Knipkamp, who was precisely the customer for the new tank. Using his invention clearly added sympathy for Henschel's project among military officials compared to Porsche's competitors. The first model of the Henschel tank was demonstrated to Hitler in mid-January 1943. The Führer was satisfied. A full-size mock-up was shown on October 20th of the same year, and by the end of the year, 3 pre-production samples were ready. Victory went to the Henschel firm. However, Hitler did not forget his old friend Porsche. The Führer gave a direct order to install those 50 turrets that Porsche had manufactured in advance onto the hull of the winning project. This decision turned the first 50 King Tigers into strange hybrids with someone else's head on the body. And this foreign head would very soon show its deadly flaw. The Porsche-designed turret had a characteristic rounded shape with powerful frontal armor. At first glance, it looked even more protected than the alternative variant. However, a terrible design flaw was discovered on the battlefield. When an enemy shell hit the lower part of the turret's frontal armor, a ricochet effect occurred. The shell did not deflect to the side as intended, but bounced straight into the roof of the tank's hull, where the armor was significantly thinner. The crew received a deadly gift from where they least expected it. Besides this structural nightmare, the Porsche turret held only 77 shells against 84 in the Henschel turret. In conditions of prolonged combat, this difference could cost lives. Also, on early samples, a special hatch for ejecting spent shell casings was located in the lower part of the turret. The idea seemed convenient, but in practice, this opening weakened the armor protection. Later it was welded shut, and on subsequent machines, it was completely removed from the design. Starting from the 51st vehicle, the Germans switched to a turret developed by the Krupp firm, produced by the Henschel firm. The new turret was distinguished by its simplicity of design and the complete absence of vulnerable openings on the sides. The frontal armor received a different geometry that excluded the ill-fated ricochet into the roof. The ammunition load increased, and protection grew. Interestingly, the name King Tiger was unofficial and was practically not used within the Wehrmacht itself. The Germans called the machine Panzerkampfwagen Tiger Ausf B, or simply Tiger B or Tiger II. The phrase Königstiger in German meant Bengal Tiger, not King Tiger at all. However, Germany's opponents preferred the louder name, which went down in history. The tank was launched into serial production in early 1944. The German command's plans were staggering in scope. Almost 1,300 machines with a continuous assembly rate of 120 tanks monthly. These figures were supposed to provide the Wehrmacht with a powerful armored fist to turn the tide of the war. However, fate decreed otherwise. On October 20th, 1943, at the Arras Proving Ground, the Germans proudly demonstrated the new machines to the military leadership. Just 3 days passed, and 569 Allied bombers dropped their deadly cargo on the city of Kassel. It was there that the factories of the Henschel firm, the sole manufacturer of King Tigers, were located. The fire caused by this bombing raged for 7 days. About 10,000 civilians and wounded soldiers in the city hospital died in the flames. 150,000 people lost their homes. The factory buildings turned into charred ruins. Ambitious plans to produce 120 tanks per month crumbled into dust. The Germans had to restore production practically from scratch. On average, it took about 14 days to assemble one King Tiger. No more than 10 machines were in the assembly shop at any one time. By August 1944, the pace was slightly increased, but Allied aviation struck new blows, and production was again halved. Instead of the planned 1,300 tanks, the Germans were able to build only about 490 machines during the entire production period. Parallel to the fall in production volumes, the quality of the manufactured tanks steadily declined. Germany was losing deposits of alloying metal ores. Nickel, chrome, and molybdenum became an incredible scarcity. Without these additives, the armor steel lost its plastic properties and became brittle, like cast iron. When an enemy shell hit a late production tank, something terrible happened. Even if the armor withstood the blow and was not pierced through, sharp pieces of metal broke off from its inner surface. These fragments flew through the fighting compartment at terrible speed, maiming and killing crew members. Ammunition detonated, and instruments and mechanisms failed. The tank, intended to protect its people, turned into a steel coffin. Due to constant bombing and transport disruptions, suppliers missed component delivery schedules. The situation became so desperate that when producing the last vehicles, tank builders even abandoned painting the interior of the hulls. There was simply not enough time or materials for this. The outer surface of the tanks was covered with a special Zimmerit paste, which protected against magnetic mines. However, in September 1944, production of this paste was stopped. The formal reason was the fear that Zimmerit might ignite under fire. Tests proved this was not the case, but no one canceled the order. The true reason lay elsewhere. Applying and drying Zimmerit paste required several additional days, which became an unaffordable luxury under the feverish production conditions of late '44. 120 tons of steel were used to create one King Tiger. For comparison, producing one Panther required only 77 tons. At the same time, the Panther was a much more balanced machine, capable of active maneuvering on the battlefield. The King Tiger, however, consumed colossal resources in exchange for extremely limited combat capabilities. The tank's primary armament was an 88mm gun capable of hitting any enemy armored vehicle at vast distances. The gun fired armor-piercing high-explosive fragmentation and cumulative shells. Additional armament consisted of 2 machine guns. One was coaxial with the gun, and the other was located in the frontal armor plate. The total ammunition load for the machine guns was 4,800 rounds. Toward the end of the war, the supply of German tank units fell into total decay. It happened that on repaired King Tigers, 75mm guns from Panthers were installed instead of the standard 88mm weapons. This was an outright humiliation for a machine that was created as a carrier for the most powerful tank gun in the world. In early 1945, 10 tanks with the Henschel turret were converted into command vehicles. The ammunition load was reduced from 84 to 63 shells. The coaxial machine gun was removed, and additional radio stations were installed in the vacated space to coordinate combat operations. With this, the list of serial modifications for the King Tiger was completely exhausted. The Third Reich no longer had time to improve the machine. In the summer of 1944, the King Tiger finally went to war. The first serial machines arrived at the 503rd Heavy Tank Battalion stationed in France. The crews looked forward to meeting the new equipment, about which enthusiastic rumors circulated. However, reality proved much more mundane than the advertising promises. The organization of a German heavy tank battalion was quite simple. The battalion included 3 companies, each consisting of 3 platoons of 4 vehicles. To this were added 2 command tanks per company and 3 command tanks for the battalion headquarters. A total of about 45 machines, representing a serious striking force when used skillfully. The first combat operation of the King Tiger was the elimination of an Allied breakthrough near the French town of Colombelles in Normandy. On July 17, 1944, German heavy tanks engaged American Shermans. The result exceeded the command's expectations. 12 enemy vehicles were left burning on the battlefield. 88mm shells pierced the American armor like cardboard. It seemed the German designers had created the perfect weapon. However, the Allied response was not long in coming. The next day, July 18th, Operation Goodwood began. This was a massive British offensive in the area of the French city of Caen, and the main tool of this operation was not armored vehicles, but aviation. The sky over the positions of the 503rd Battalion turned black with bombers. Hundreds of planes dropped tons of bombs on the German tanks that had just celebrated victory yesterday. Neither thick armor nor a powerful gun helped against the aerial threat. King Tigers burned just as well as any other tanks. This day clearly demonstrated the main vulnerability of German armored power. The Allied command quickly realized that in an open tank battle, it was practically impossible to resist the King Tiger. The frontal armor, 150 millimeters thick, withstood hits from any tank guns. The sides were protected by 80-millimeter armor at a significant slope. American Shermans, with their 75-millimeter guns, could only helplessly scratch this steel fortress. Until an adequate opponent appeared, the Allies handled the situation by the only available means. Upon meeting a King Tiger, all ground fire weapons opened fire simultaneously. Tanks, anti-tank guns, and artillery poured a hail of shells on the German machine in the hope of somehow damaging it or forcing the crew to retreat. This was not so much a way of fighting as an act of desperation. The situation changed in September 1944 when the American M36 self-propelled gun appeared on the Western Front. This vehicle carried a 90-millimeter gun capable of piercing the King Tiger's armor at realistic combat distances. Finally, the Allies had a tool that allowed them to fight the German giant on equal terms. But the real nightmare for German tank crews awaited them not in the West. The Eastern Front, where the Red Army fought, became a true cemetery for King Tigers. It was Soviet tankers who developed the tactics that turned the boasted German machine into a helpless target. The main problem with the King Tiger was its monstrous mass. 69 tons of steel required a corresponding power plant. However, the 700-horsepower Maybach engine, inherited from the significantly lighter Panther, categorically failed to cope with its task. On a good road, the tank accelerated to a maximum of 38 kilometers per hour. On rough terrain, the speed dropped to 13 kilometers per hour. When overcoming climbs, the machine barely crawled. The gearbox and engine constantly overheated from the unbearable load and failed. The transmission required careful handling, which was impossible in real combat conditions. Tankers had to choose, either spare the mechanisms and risk their lives, or maneuver actively and guaranteed to break down. The King Tiger's tracks also brought unpleasant surprises. The designer's desire to reduce ground pressure led to the use of extra-wide tracks. However, the drive sprocket teeth completely wore out after only 250 to 350 kilometers of travel. The track belts slipped. The tank lost its already low mobility. Transport was a separate headache. The machine had two sets of tracks, wide combat ones and narrow transport ones for railway transport. Moreover, combat tracks from the Panther were used as transport tracks. Before each loading onto a platform, the crew had to engage in the laborious procedure of changing tracks, which took up precious time. Bridges over rivers represented a separate category of opponent for the King Tiger. Most European bridges were simply not designed for a 70-ton load. When retreating, the Germans were forced to abandon functioning machines on the bank, having no way to ferry them across the water barrier. Evacuating damaged tanks turned into a logistical nightmare, requiring special tractors and a lot of effort. Soviet commanders quickly understood the strong enemy's weak points. It was only necessary to force the King Tiger to maneuver, impose close combat on it, and deprive it of the opportunity to fire from a safe distance. And this is exactly what Soviet tankers brilliantly demonstrated in August 1944 at the Sandomierz bridgehead. The August sun beat down mercilessly over Polish land when the 501st Heavy Tank Battalion of the Wehrmacht received orders to move toward the Sandomierz bridgehead. A few weeks ago, Soviet troops crossed the Vistula and established themselves on the west bank of the river. The German command threw its most powerful trump card against the bridgehead, the latest King Tigers, which had never yet met the Red Army. On August 13, 1944, a column of heavy German tanks moved to attack. The crews were confident in their superiority. Their machines carried impenetrable armor and guns capable of hitting any Soviet equipment at a distance of over 2 kilometers. Success seemed guaranteed. However, Soviet commanders prepared a cruel surprise for the Germans. Instead of a head-on collision, where the advantage would be on the side of the enemy, the Red Army soldiers imposed a battle on their own terms. T-34-85 tanks and heavy IS-2 tanks took positions in ambushes, using terrain folds and village buildings. When the German column pulled into the trap, Soviet tankers opened fire from short distances, where armor thickness no longer gave the King Tigers an absolute advantage. The side armor of the German machines proved vulnerable to the 85mm shells of Soviet tanks. Heavy IS-2's with their 122mm guns pierced even the enemy's frontal protection. The battle turned into a nightmare for the German tankers. Their sluggish machines did not have time to turn their turrets to respond to fire from different directions. Engines overheated during maneuver attempts. Tracks bogged down in the soft soil of Polish fields. One by one, King Tigers burst into flames from accurate hits by Soviet shells. By the end of the day, the remains of 24 German tanks littered the battlefield. Among them were 3 King Tigers, which were mistakenly identified as Panthers in early reports. Soviet commanders did not yet know they had encountered the enemy's latest secret machine. This became clear only upon detailed inspection of the captured trophies. Among the abandoned equipment, machines with hull numbers 102, 234, and 502 were found. Particular interest was sparked by tank number 502, found in the yard of a village in an absolutely incredible state. Fully fueled tanks, a full ammunition load, functioning mechanisms. The crew simply jumped out of the vehicle and vanished, abandoning a most valuable sample of enemy equipment. This kind of behavior by German tank crews was encountered surprisingly often with the King Tiger. The massive machine instilled fear not only in the enemy, but also in its own crews. At the slightest threat of encirclement or damage to the chassis, Germans preferred to leave the tank rather than risk being trapped in a steel snare. The next day, August 14th, Soviet troops continued the offensive and sent 6 more King Tigers into oblivion. The combat debut of the boasted German machine on the Eastern Front turned into a total failure. In 2 days of fighting, the Wehrmacht lost more King Tigers than during the entire time of the battles in Normandy. This battle became overgrown with many legends and myths. Subsequently, stories appeared that Ferdinand Porsche himself or his son allegedly died in the lead tank. In fact, both safely survived the war and for many years spent the money earned on military contracts with Hitler's Germany. But the beautiful legend of the creator's death, along with his creation, firmly entered popular memory. The captured tank with number 502 was immediately sent to the rear for study. Soviet engineers gained the opportunity to study the enemy's strengths and weaknesses in detail. Today, this very tank is on display at the Tank Museum in Kubinka near Moscow, where anyone can see the trophy of the legendary battle. Vehicle number 102 was sent to the proving ground for experimental firing. The combat experience of the Sandomir's bridgehead clearly demonstrated that with proper tactics, Soviet tanks were quite capable of destroying King Tigers. The key to victory was the correct organization of the battle. Ambushes instead of frontal attacks, shooting at the sides instead of trying to pierce the frontal armor, and imposing close combat instead of a duel at long distances. Perhaps the only tank capable of resisting the King Tiger on equal terms under any conditions was the Soviet heavy tank IS-2. Its 122mm gun pierced German armor at realistic combat distances. Soviet self-propelled artillery units with large-caliber guns like the Su-100, ISU-122, and ISU-152 also achieved good results. By the end of 1944, German data recorded the loss of 74 King Tigers on all fronts. At the same time, only 17 of them could be repaired and returned to service. The remaining machines were destroyed beyond recovery or captured by the enemy. The ratio of losses to restored tanks clearly demonstrated the King Tiger's main problem. It was practically impossible to evacuate and repair it in field conditions. The last major battles involving King Tigers were the Ardennes offensive and the battles at Lake Balaton. In the vicinity of the Hungarian lake, the Wehrmacht made its last attempt at an offensive during the Second World War. From January to March 1945, 19 tanks of this type were destroyed here. On March 1st, 226 King Tigers remained in the service of the Wehrmacht and SS troops. A significant portion of the machines was concentrated in East Prussia. The heavy tank battalion of the Das Reich Division and the 511th and 505th Tank Battalions participated in the defense of Königsberg. Now King Tigers were used in small groups and primarily for firing from a stationary position. As a fixed firing point, the machine proved to be most effective. On April 21st, while repelling a Soviet attack, 12 Soviet tanks were knocked out by the fire of one King Tiger and 2 self-propelled guns. In a week of fighting from April 13th, the 511th Battalion recorded 102 Soviet combat vehicles to its account. The remnants of the 505th Battalion ended their combat path in the city of Pillau, now Baltijsk, in the Kaliningrad region. The 502nd and 503rd SS battalions participated in the defense of Berlin. In the last weeks of the war, all available machines were thrown into battle, including training and test samples, and even a Porsche design prototype. On May 2nd, 1945, the last King Tiger was knocked out in the area of the Spandau Bridge. Hitler's unfulfilled hope burned along with the Third Reich.